Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Generation One podcast. We have an amazing conversation today about communication. So thankful that you chose to join us. Rick, how do you feel about communication?
Man, communication is vital. It's everything that is necessary for any healthy relationship. It takes work, but if you do the work, you create safe spaces.
Absolutely. It does take work, and we're going to show you a little bit of our process right now in this video. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome, we are Generation One, and today we're having a healthy conversation about communication. Now I have my friends here, and I'm gonna give them a couple questions to answer. So, how do you define healthy communication in relationships, guys?
I think for me, as I've learned to grow as a communicator in every relationship I have in life, I've learned that you have to be honest, but you also have to be patient. Because not everybody's going to know how to communicate with you, and you're not going to know necessarily how to communicate with everybody. So there has to be a level of patience that you have when communicating with another person, because we're also unique and diverse. But you also have to be truthful, because if you're not truthful in a conversation with somebody, you might be withholding something from them that they need. So I think with each conversation that you find yourself in, and when you're communicating with others, you have to know how to flow. You kind of have to have this ebb and flow of, kind of sensing the moment of how to communicate with another person from a place of love, from a place of kindness, and from a place of compassion. And that's also really, really hard, even whenever somebody angers you. So when you ask the question, what does healthy communication look like? Healthy communication looks like, okay, I'm sensing the moment, and I want to approach this, even though I might be frustrated, from a place of love, from a place of peace. And if I find myself in a place where I'm frustrated, I take a moment before I speak. So be slow to speak. But I think you grow as a communicator. You grow in communication every time that you talk to somebody.
Yeah,
That's really good. I'll piggyback off that. I think you said something at the very end about it's the ebb and flow, most importantly being slow to speak. So I think most importantly, I look at the fact that I plan out my conversations. If it's going to be a difficult one, there's a notepad, here are my 3 points I'm going to make. But also, as they're communicating, I'm also listening to understand, not to respond. And I think sometimes we often forget, I have my 3 points, I'm ready, I'm gonna make my point, but also, I have to hear what they're saying and what they're expressing, how they're feeling, before I do respond the way I'm responding, to have a conversation, not to make my points.
100%.
That's so good.
Honestly, for me, healthy communication starts with yourself. Literally, I woke up this morning, I had a moment of frustration. I said to myself, "You're so stupid." And I'm like, that's not healthy communication, you know what I mean? And if I can't talk to myself and communicate, because you have to talk to your feelings sometimes. You have to challenge them, you know what I mean? How am I feeling right now?
Absolutely.
Is this valid? You know what I mean? Could be fleeting, but if I can't do that within myself, it's really hard to bring that to another person. Because to your point, Ty, we all communicate differently, and when your mental and your internal is tainted, you don't hear right, you don't see right, you don't speak right, you know what I mean? You could say the sky is blue and you won't believe it, you know what I mean? Because your internal is so messed up and your inner communication with yourself is so messed up.
That's powerful.
So I really just try first to strengthen that healthy communication with me, so then I can, bring that into my relationships.
That's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Is starting first with communicating with yourself. And I think whenever you start your day, you should do that. You should communicate, of course, with God, but you should communicate with yourself. Check in with yourself. Take inventory. That's really, really good.
Yeah, another thing, Ty, when you mentioned communicating with love, I feel like when you can talk to yourself in love and be gentle with yourself, that's when you can show up and be gentle with others. You have patience in the conversation. You have grace in the conversation. Because sometimes I will talk out loud how I talk to myself, and I'm like, whoa, that was a little aggressive. That was a little much. And then I'm like, okay. And then there's another thing. I forgot who said this, but it was sometimes you have to talk to yourself or others as if you're talking to a little kid. How gentle are you? You're like, hey, it's totally fine. You're gonna be okay, you know? So, yeah, there's so many different good points you guys brought up.
Yeah.
Big time.
And if I can, I would say that's the starting point, Michaela, of vulnerability, which is a very key part of healthy communication. when you can be vulnerable with yourself, vulnerable enough to be honest, and to check yourself and say, you know, okay, I said that I'm stupid, but that's because I'm feeling blah, blah, blah. This made me feel, or this brought out this insecurity, because now you have an understanding of where you're at. And then when you have somebody who maybe didn't have great communication, or maybe said something that rubbed you the wrong way, now you can approach that dialogue with vulnerability and say, you know, to be honest, there's certain types of things, or there's certain ways that you can direct your dialogue towards me that don't feel like it's breaking me down. Because I think that in order to have good communication, first you have to be vulnerable enough to, you know, open up to the person that you're communicating with and say, this is, you know, this may sound this way to you, but to me, it sounds like this. And those two things can be completely different. So I would just say having the vulnerability with yourself so that you can approach the other person with vulnerability. So that way, you know, there's an element of safety. Because I think that if you're not able to be vulnerable, then you can't teach another person how to communicate in a way that's safe for you, in a way that feels right to you. Yeah.
And honestly, like, can we talk about boundaries? Because like that has a lot to do, like what you're saying, and the boundaries aren't easy to communicate, especially with people you love and people you care about. But you have to have that like inner. I know this is what I need. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna try my best to communicate to you with love. You know what I mean? That's good. That's good, Ren.
I love that. I love that. So, in this journey of learning how to communicate in a healthy way, what have you guys learned about yourselves?
Tete, you want to kick us off with this one?
Sure. Communication, I would say, is actually something that I can struggle with sometimes. I can sometimes kind of just like internalize a lot of stuff, and bringing stuff up is really like scary for me because I don't know how the other person's gonna react. And I've had experiences where I have brought up or shared my feelings, even if it was in a kind way and the response wasn't great. So now sometimes I have a tendency to like shrink back when I know that I need to speak up about something. I am the type of person too. I like to have, full, not plot, but like, I like to have it almost like bullet points. I don't write them out, but I like, you know what I mean? Just so that I can make sure that I'm communicating effectively. And sometimes it's like my mind feels so all over the place that like communication just feels like I don't even know what I'm trying to say yet until like, so I don't, you know, so it also keeps me from talking as well. So I would say that it's something that I struggle with, but something that I've learned about myself in communication. Oof. I don't know.
I think that was a lesson in itself.
It was.
I
was thinking that. I was like,
Yeah.
that's huge.
Yeah.
You're growing and you're self-aware enough to know that like it's tough, but I am saying things even though they might not come out like in the most nicest way, but I'm doing it. Because for me, I've been in relationships and even with family growing up, I felt like there was so much going on with my family that I didn't want to be a burden. So I would be very quiet. So now when I do express myself, I'm very passionate. So when it comes out, it can seem aggressive, but I'm just like, I'm also excited that I'm saying something. I'm also excited that I have a safe enough place to speak up. Finally, you know, so.
Right. And it's so freeing once you finally do speak up, and especially when it's received well too. Obviously, I mean, in a perfect world, it would always be received well when you communicate. But it is very like you feel so empowered once you finally do speak up, and then sometimes it's easier than you think it's going to be. So that's, I guess that's something I'm learning.
For sure. I think that it's a delicate balance because you want to make sure that you're honoring yourself, but you also want to make sure you honor the other person because oftentimes you can be in a situation where you're like, okay, I said everything that I needed to say, so I'm good. And it's like, but you just burned that person. You just hurt that person. So what grounds me whenever I navigate any relationship with myself, with others, with God, with my spouse, is really there's a passage of scripture where Jesus is asked, they said, what is the most important commandment? And he responds to them and he says, okay, I'm gonna give it to you like this, and this is how I interpret Jesus saying it. He didn't say that, but I interpret it like he's like okay, y'all really want to go? Okay, y'all want to go? Okay, this is what it is. It is first and foremost to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength, and then sequence, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. Why does he say as? He says as you love yourself because number one, you have to learn to love God. How do you learn to love God? You open yourself up to God and you experience him. And when you experience him, you realize, wow, God says I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. God says that I am, he has thoughts for me, thoughts of a future and a hope. He's got plans for my life, meaning that he doesn't think a negative thought towards you. There's even a passage of scripture that literally says he thinks thoughts that are good and not evil, because that's who he is. That's who God is. And once you get that, then you can love yourself, right? And then now the sequence is love your neighbor as you love yourself. So you learn to love yourself so that then you can love your neighbor that way. And then whenever you go into a conversation or into communication, you now are coming from the place of, well, I love myself because I've learned how to from my relationship with God. And because I know how to love myself, I want to give to others as I would want for myself, which is that love, which is, patience and kindness and understanding. And that helps me stay grounded whenever I'm navigating any kind of communication or conversation with anybody is, okay, well, I'm loved by God and this person is also loved by God. So I want to communicate with them the way God would want to communicate with them, or God would want me to communicate with them, because it's really easy to just, and we do it, I'm guilty, where we will do it and we pop off, or we say something that wasn't right, or we're like, oh, that was a little harsh. But we're human and we're gonna make those mistakes, but it's being self-aware enough to say, okay, that wasn't right. Let me tell that person, hey, listen, I might have been a little harsh. I may have came off a little crass. I may have, whatever. And then even that simple act shows this person cares enough to say this, even if you weren't offended by it, but I think that's what helps me stay grounded.
So, I've learned this thing that sometimes it's about what we say, but sometimes there's value in the quiet moment before we respond. Like, because I think the first thing that comes to mind in an argument is like all the points they did wrong. It's like all the inner frustration is going to come out, but sometimes there's value in just taking a bit and being quiet and giving space for both sides to prepare for the conversation in a healthy way. I think sometimes fast does not mean healthy. Sometimes getting it done does not mean healthy. It's like, I'd rather not have the conversation than just be crazy. Like, let's wait. If it's a day or a week, it may be painful, but through that quiet moment, we may get there.
Yeah.
That's true.
I feel like there's some emotion over there.
Really loud. There's some stirring.
I was receiving repentance, actually. But no, because I was going to say, what am I learning about myself? To kind of bring it back to the question. I think that I have had to learn how, even though you do want to be empowered and you do want to say something, you do not have to say it right then and there. I think that, there is value to, addressing things and not going to bed angry. Like that's a thing that they say. Don't go to bed angry. But I also think if you are tired and hungry, especially me, if I'm tired and I'm hungry, that is not a good time to have communication. And especially when something is fresh, you don't even have the capacity to really take your emotions out of it and see things objectively. So I think that what you're looking at me and smiling is really funny. I think something that I had to learn, which is interesting because Taya processes things differently than I do. She's like, I know I need a moment to process, so I will process. And like, while I'm like sitting and like dying to like have this hash out because I want to fix it. I want to fix it. But you can't be so anxious to want to fix it that you missed out on the opportunity to receive the tools to fix it. So I think that it is, to your point, Jalen, all this to say I agree, to be honest. But it's so valuable and important to take the time and minister to yourself. That's where the self-love comes from. Allow God to minister to you, minister to yourself. So that way you can see things from a healthy perspective. Because if somebody hurt you, of course you're kind of going to go into a defensive, broken state. But once you could say like, okay, you know what, I'm separating, this person might be going through something and this is why they said this to me. Or this is why they did this to me. And it has nothing to do with me, but it has something to do with them. Then you can approach it from a very, very healthy, objective way. So yes, please give yourself a moment. Breathe, process, reflect. Determine what's true and what's not true, and then go from there and have that dialogue.
As you were sharing that, this thought came to mind, like, you can't go into a conversation to fix something if it's still breaking you. Like, I think about therapy, right? When you go to therapy, it's not about having a dialogue about everybody else. It's about healing yourself from what's been impacting you from that person. Like, your therapist is not like, hey, it's been great. Your $100 for this hour is amazing, but now go spend an hour talking to that person and come. It's like, no, let's focus on you. Let's repair you.
Right.
That way the conversation is from a place of healed and wholeness versus I'm broken right now and I want to fix something.
Right.
Broken things can't fix things. Healed things can, and so you have to go through that process of healing to have the right conversation.
I got two things to piggyback off of because both of what you two said was brilliant. But the first one I'll go into is what I've learned from what I've learned about healthy communication. A lot of it has come from my wife. Like what I've been challenged to do is, because I would be the type to just, if something happened or something offended me, instead of talking about it, I would sweep it under the rug and move on because I can do that.
Yeah.
But that's a lie. Because what happens is I'm sweeping it under the rug, and all of a sudden this rug, you can't really walk over it anymore because now there's a bunch of stuff piled up underneath it.
Yeah.
So I've got all this stuff underneath the surface, and then it takes that one thing, you step on it just like you step on a Lego and it hurts your foot, and you're like, and then you lash out.
Yeah.
So I've learned to, yes, give myself time, but not too much time, because if I forget about it, which you never really forget, you actually just suppress the thing, and it just stays there until a trigger happens. And then when the trigger happens, you're like, oh, now I'm gonna get you because you got me all those times and I never said anything, but I'm gonna get you now. And that's not healthy. And then to Jalen's point about therapy and what the goal is to be able to heal yourself so that you can be healthy when you navigate others, is forgiveness is so important. Because if you don't forgive yourself and the person that may have offended you, you're the one who's carrying it around.
Facts.
You're the one who's got the backpack full of bricks. It's not them. You're carrying around that bitterness. You're carrying around that resentment. You're carrying around that pain. So that's why forgiveness is so crucial. We have to forgive ourselves and we have to forgive others so that we're not the ones walking around, because they're not, chances are they're not the one carrying around that weight.
They
You
forgot
are.
about it.
Yeah,
They
they
forgot
took-
about it.
right.
Exactly. So you have to take that moment, and maybe in that moment you should ask yourself, okay, did I forgive myself, or can I forgive that person before I approach them?
Yeah.
Because if you go in there and you still have all that bitterness and resentment and anger, you might start throwing bricks at them. And then that doesn't allow us to have the healthy and loving dialogue and communication. So
I love that time. And I'm going to go back to your first point about like people. And I feel like that's what I've learned. I feel like a big part of healthy communication is removing like the ego out of it. And I had to learn that like I can be vulnerable and soft, and I can also be strong and assertive. And like me having a moment of communicating, hey, I'm feeling insecure right now, or hey, you hurt me, that doesn't make me a weak woman. You know what I mean? Doesn't make me naggy, annoying. Like this is a level of growth and maturity, but I have to remove my ego from it. You know what I mean? And I didn't love when you say this, but when you were like, if you're triggered, I'm gonna get you now. You know what I mean? That like, I struggle with that. I low-key put tallies on people, like, in my head.
No judgment. No judgment.
The face.
No judgment at all. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. No,
But I'm trying to not do that, and that, couples with forgiveness and grace, and really just, like, this is another human that I don't know what they're dealing with, so let me, like, if I can usher in this atmosphere of a safe space and, like, okay, I'm putting my ego down, let's talk, you know what I mean? Like, that sometimes helps the conversation, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah. Ty, you brought in bringing God into your communication. And Ren, you also spoke on like giving yourself that time to really like allow God to put downloads into how am I supposed to assess this situation? Because let me tell you, when one person wants to talk right away and the other one is like, I need to process, it's not a pretty picture. It's not a pretty picture. And just allowing God that time and space to let you know what you did wrong, so you're also able to come and say, I'm sorry. Like and sometimes that doesn't it takes a little bit of time, a little longer for one person to say it and realize it versus the other, when the other one's like, I'm ready to talk about it right now. Like, I know what you did wrong. I know what I did wrong. Let's talk. But the other person is still at like I think I'm still mad and I just don't want to talk right now. But all of your guys' points were really, really good. I have another question. What advice would you share with someone who struggles with communication?
I'll start off. I would just say the longer you avoid like tapping into it, I don't want to say the harder it's going to get, but like I think people run from it, and it's like start it, you know what I mean? And it's like you
Yeah.
start in like these little steps every day, like simple stuff, you know what I mean? Just speaking up in a meeting when you don't, or standing up, it's just those little steps, and like you do that every day, and it gets easier and easier versus like waking up one day, you're 45 and you're like, I don't know how to communicate, and like I want to have a family, all that, but just start it. Just try it.
Yeah, that's good. To anyone who struggles with communication, to Michaela's point, you have to start. You have to start and actively make a decision to say, I want to grow as a communicator. I want to grow in the area of communication. And I do believe that communication is an area where you will always be growing. You're always going to be growing, because what I said earlier is every person is different. And because every person is different, you're going to have to learn how to communicate with that person. Because no one's the same. And the more that you grow in communication with yourself, with God, and with others, the better you become as a communicator, and you can navigate. And I think it if I could wrap it up and put a bow on it and hand it to you in a perfect package and say, this is how you should become a better communicator, which I can't, because I think that,
Like, that would be a book.
you know,
You can do that. Here's the deal.
Exactly. But since I can't, and since it's arguably so that no one really can, what I would say to you, just from my learnings, is be open. Be open to growth. If you allow yourself to be open to growth, and you have a desire to say, I desire to be better in this area, and you assume the posture of a student, you'll always learn something new about yourself and about others as you navigate communication.
Yes, I want to add to that. Michaela and I were just talking about like work situations, and when you are open to being a better communicator, God aligns so many different opportunities for you to step up and be better. In balance, PT spoke about life giving you constant opportunities to like be better and do better. So at work, when you're facing something hard, it's like, okay, if I stand up tall in this and do my best to communicate, then this is going to help my future relationship, not only with my husband, but like my kids, and then friends and family, So being open to healthy communication in all ways. Very good point.
Love that.
I think it's really, so my life is a bunch of psychology, right? It's living with people, it's understanding how they work, and it's helping manage organizations from that perspective. And one of the most important things I could say is learning how you naturally communicate. What is your communication style? Because I think to Ty's point, learn the other person's, but how do you want to communicate? Like, are you an introvert or an extrovert? What's your apology language? All these things are important to understand what it means of how do I want to receive that dialogue, but also how do I tweak my language to theirs, right? In order to translate to Spanish, you have to know English, or learn or have a native language that you're translating from. And so knowing what you want to do naturally and embracing that and developing that helps you translate to the other language.
That's great.
Yeah.
As you go forward.
Ooh, I gotta sneak in there again. Because when you're communicating with different people, it helps so much to like get to know the other person you're communicating with. Like my family, when it comes to my parents, I'm like, okay, if my mom, this is funny, but if my mom would get mad, I'd be like, if I tell her a joke, she'll be happy, like right away. And not that I'm trying to be manipulative or anything like that, but I'm like, I know my mom, and sometimes she just gets a little sensitive. But if I just make her laugh real quick, it's like, okay, we're good, and then we can talk about it. I'll be like, Mom, we can say things the other ways. But really learning the person that you're talking to helps so much.
Look at us. That was communication through the eyes.
Through the eyes.
That was communication through the eyes.
That's a
okay.
thing.
I'll just go. I think it all goes back to what Michaela brilliantly said at the beginning, which is having healthy communication with yourself. Because it really, really does start with having an understanding of who you are and where you're at. To the person who just doesn't know how to start communicating, I would actually advise journal. I would advise journaling. I would say start writing down exactly how you feel, and actually hold nothing back. Like just literally write out exactly how you feel, hold nothing back, and you can throw it away, or you can decide how you want to reframe it and communicate to somebody else. But at least start with having an understanding of expressing yourself. Like this is how I express myself. Because maybe you'll find you know, I'm more connected to the sad emotion, or I'm kind of more connected to the angry emotion. And that's kind of how you can test, like, okay, how I communicate, how do I express my emotions. Now, to the person who feels like maybe they over communicate or they like cross boundaries or something like that, I would say the best way to really learn how to talk better is to learn how to listen better. So it's a reverse psychology. Like, if I want to have a good conversation with my sister, I know, or my husband or my friends, I know that in order for it to go past a minute and 30 seconds, because they'll be pissed because I didn't say anything. Can I say pissed? I'm so sorry. Because they'll be upset.
Say pissed.
They'll be pissed because, you know, I basically blathered on about what I think. If I want to have a good, effective conversation, then I need to be able to listen. I need to be able to really listen and process, and sometimes just sit there and just say nothing. Just sit there and say absolutely nothing, so that I can really take everything in and take inventory. Then, from a place of true understanding, now I can express, okay, you know, and you know, this is how I want to approach where they're at. Because if I listen, sometimes it's not what they say, it's how they say it. And I can sense that you're hurt, or I can sense that you're excited, I can sense that this, and then that will teach you how to approach that. Yeah, so those would be my thoughts.
Yeah. I think what you said about journaling, I think that is really what helped me to communicate, because most of the time I wouldn't communicate because I didn't know how I felt. I was like, I feel everything. And, you know, like, what is that? You know what I mean? So I really do think that writing it out, seeing it, and even being able to find truth in that too a lot of times, because sometimes I'm mad about stuff, and or I'm feeling things, and then I read back and I'm like, that's not even true. This is not even true. That's not how this happened. Like, it's a lot. It really allows you to see things as a whole. So I think really what helped me to communicate, I definitely think, was journaling. And then just start in small ways, or start with like people that you really feel safe around before, you know, maybe you don't want to go for the big fish, the person that's going to judge, you know what I mean? Maybe you don't want to go for that person first, but start in like little ways, in small environments, in places where you feel safe, just so you can at least start stretching that muscle. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, just so you can keep at it, so that you're not just keeping quiet, because that, you know, that's something that I struggled with. So, so yeah, that would be my advice.
So a thought came to mind, a question.
Okay.
How do you get over a moment when someone has taken advantage of communication? So you've been vulnerable, right? You've had the dialogue and they've used it against you. And now you're like, how do I move forward to getting conversation? How do you rebuild that trust with people?
I think, sorry, were you about to say something?
No, you go for it. I'll jump in after you.
A lot of stuff is internal, because we can't control everything. And even if we were to journal and practice and like, my headspace is right, this is how I'm going to approach this person, that person might not be in the same headspace. So it's up to us to be like, I communicated this for me. And if that person decided to discard my trust, my communication, that's on them. Right. I feel like God will reward me for my authenticity and, you know, my maturity, and then I don't know what's gonna happen with, but that's what I would say.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, what I was thinking is, to your point and to your question, Jalen, I think that when somebody, even when you've done everything right and you've taken every step you can to make sure that you've communicated in a healthy way, and somebody doesn't receive it well and they turn it back on you, I think the most important thing, to Michaela's point, is to recognize that you can't let, although they might not receive it the way you want them to, because sometimes they won't. You have to at least in yourself say, I can't let this harden my heart. Because if I allow this to harden my heart, again, it's the same thing. Now you are the one who's going to be feeling that as you go forward. So you have to reason within yourself that, okay, they didn't receive it well, and it is what it is. And you release it. And when you release it and come back to yourself and say, okay, they didn't receive it the way I wanted it. They wanted, you know, I wanted them to receive it. So be it. And you can't let that stop you from growing as a communicator. You can't let that stop you from growing, because if that were to happen, we would never grow.
Yeah.
And it goes back to your point about like moving in love, you know, communicating in love, through love.
No, I think if I'm being honest, I've had moments where I've communicated, and it took me so much to even get to the point of communicating, and I communicated to someone, and then it was not received well, and it just like didn't go the way I thought. I really pumped myself up. I was like, yes, I'm doing it. Here I am. This is a growth moment. And then I communicated, and it did not go the same way. And I found myself having times where my heart has been hardened. I'm never gonna talk to anyone again. Oh my gosh, forget it, never again. I just won't communicate. Yeah. But then, kind of like you said, like I was hurting myself all the time, and then I would want to speak up, and I'd be like, I would remember that moment and be like, no, and my heart would be hard, but like it just like it's not a good space to be in. Like you just feel worse and worse and worse, and then like you said, it kind of piles up until one day you explode, and then you have friendships and you can't communicate to your friends, and so you can't, like, they're not sustainable. Like it really affects so many different aspects of your life and so many different relationships, not just with that person that you had that little altercation or whatever it was with, but it affects so much in your life and just affects you. It's like poison, you know what I mean? And that spreads and spreads and spreads. So I had to kind of get to a space, like you said, kind of just where I was like, you know what? I would rather communicate and not, maybe get that back, but I know that I'm growing in that, and I'm feeling better, and I'm feeling more open, and I'm not suppressed, and I'm not going through and hiding, how I feel, you know what I mean? Because then a lot of times it's like you're going through stuff alone too, because it's about, sometimes about communicating emotions as well. Right. Yeah. And then when you cut off communication, like period, even if it's just like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. No, but like, am I saying it? Okay. Sometimes I feel like I hope I'm making sense. Okay, cool.
We got you.
Cool.
You did.
Did I lose my train of thought? May have, but it's fine. But learning how to, gotcha.
I want to say what you just said in one sentence.
Okay.
Because what you just said was a mic drop. It's not about the vindication. It's about freedom. It's about staying free enough to say what you need to say and be free. I've released that now. And now that you didn't receive it, I release you now.
Right.
I release you now
God
because
bless.
you've
God
now
bless.
shown me that I cannot be safe with
Yeah.
you. And that means that I don't have to pull up a wall for myself, but that means I have to have a boundary with you as a person, because you've shown me that you've taken advantage of my vulnerability.
really good.
So it's about freedom.
And I think that goes back to your point about like big picture, right? Like I communicate with, say, my significant other, and it fails in this moment, and I'm thinking this relationship fails, but like that moment was for me 5 years from now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like that was for something else. I'm gonna bring this to work. I'm gonna bring this to something else. You know what I mean? It's big picture.
Yes, it's all a part of the process.
This is powerful. And I think as we close our thoughts out, this again is an example of us communicating. Like we've just talked amongst each other, and what it does is it allows us now to take this and what did we learn from it? Right. Also, because I'm going to walk away from this like, okay, I heard some great things that you guys said. I'm going to apply that to my communication skills as I go forward in life. And that's really ultimately what we want for this to be for you. We want this to be a continuation of the conversation. We started it, and maybe you sat through the whole thing. Maybe you caught it here and there, and you've listened to it, and you broke it up into chunks. But either way, this is an opportunity for you to have the conversation amongst yourself, amongst your friends, your family, those who are close to you. Because one thing about communication is you will always have to be communicating for the rest of your life. So what we can do as a people is grow and desire to become better. And every single day that we're given on this earth, we should desire to grow in every area of our lives. And one of those that's very important is communication. But this was great.
Yes, so good talking to you guys. Alrighty, till next time.
See you guys soon.
We hope that conversation blessed you like it blessed us. I know that we're going to watch it a few more times personally. Every shoot day is special with Generation 1. All of the wisdom they share, the vulnerability they share. We love it. We look forward to it. What do you think?
Listen, I loved it, because it's family at the end of the day. Now listen, family, we want to give you an opportunity. If Gen 1 has done anything in your life, has affected you positively, so into this moment. We got a QR code right here, somewhere. Put it right here over his face.
Somewhere.
But listen, the point of this is so we can continue to do what we're doing right here. We are a subsidiary of One, our big house, our family, so we want to continue to do the things that we do for the kingdom. Thank y'all.
Absolutely. And before you go, I don't know if you clicked off yet, you have to like, You have to subscribe because there's plenty more content coming. Content from One, content from Generation One. So don't leave without leaving a like and subscribing so you can turn on your post notifications and stay tuned for all the other content coming. We love you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.